I'm going to begin this one at midnight, in a cold estate office, with a man standing very still in a doorway, because that is the moment everything turned. And I want you standing in that doorway with him, so that you feel exactly what he felt. His name was Miles Aldous, Earl of Cromarsh, and he had not slept properly in the better part of a year. He had taken to wandering his great cold house at night, the way troubled men do, down the long, dark corridors of a place that was slowly slipping out of his hands, and on this particular night in the November of 1819, his wandering had brought him, a little after midnight, to the door of his own estate office, where, to his great surprise, a light was burning. A single candle. He could see its glow under the door, warm against the cold flagstones of the passage, and he stood looking at it for a long moment, because no one had any business in the estate office at midnight, least of all by a single guttering candle, and because, you understand, the Earl of Cromarsh had a particular reason to be interested in who was in his account books in the dark. For something very strange had been happening to his ledgers. For some weeks now, 6, perhaps 7, the Earl had been finding corrections in them, small ones. A figure altered here and there in a fine, delicate hand he did not recognize. A sum struck through and quietly amended in the margin. A penciled note, in tiny, precise letters, beside an entry. This does not reconcile. He had thought, the first time, that he had imagined it. The second time, he had thought it some error of his own steward's. But it had gone on, these phantom corrections, appearing in his books between one day and the next, always in the same small, exact hand. Always, he had slowly come to realize, right. For every time he had taken the trouble to check the ghost's arithmetic against his own, the ghost had been correct, and the ledger had been wrong. Someone was coming into his account books in the night, and quietly, patiently, mending them, and the Earl of Cromarsh, whose estate was failing around him for reasons he could not for the life of him fathom, had begun to feel that he was being haunted by the one thing a failing man most longs for, and most dreads, a conscience that could count. So when he saw the candle burning under the office door at midnight, the Earl did not call out. He set his hand to the latch, very softly, and he opened the door. And there, at the great table, surrounded by his ledgers, 3 years of them, open and stacked and spread, with loose sheets of close calculation laid out between them in neat ranks, bent over the books with a pencil in her hand and a single candle at her elbow, and her whole still face, intent in the small gold light, was the seamstress. The seamstress, the quiet, plain seamstress who had come to Cromarsh in the autumn to do the household's mending, whom he had passed in the corridors 100 times without once truly seeing, to whom he had never spoken above a dozen words, the woman he had assumed, on the single occasion he had thought about her at all, could very likely not even read. She was, at that moment, 3 years deep into his accounts, and on the sheet beneath her hand, circled twice in pencil, was a single figure, and beside it, in that small, exact ghost's hand he had been chasing for 7 weeks, 4 words that were about to change both their lives. Here, this is the theft, and I am going to stop us right there. Right there, with the Earl of Cromarsh frozen in the doorway, and the seamstress's head just beginning to lift at the sound of the latch, and that pencil-circled figure burning on the page between them in the candlelight. Because before I tell you what she had found, and what it meant, and what it cost, you and I have our arrangement to keep. Find the subscribe button and press it. It is free, and it takes a moment, and it means the next story finds you the instant I have it ready, and there is always a next, and they are always worth the having. And if you will not, then you owe me one, and I am very patient about my debts, and I never, ever forget, especially not this one, not with a theft on the table and a candle burning down. Now, before I let her lift her head and meet his eye, I must take you back to who that quiet seamstress truly was, and to the failing house she had walked into, and to a man who looked at a woman, bent over a needle, and assumed there was nothing behind her eyes worth knowing. He was about to learn how wrong a clever man can be. Come back with me, and I will show you how it began. Her name was Hannah Mercer, and the name was no accident, for her people had been mercers, dealers in fine cloth and small goods, for 3 generations, and Hannah had been born in the back rooms above a good shop, in a market town in the West Country, into the warm, busy world of trade. I want you to understand that world, because it made her, and it is not a world this kind of story usually troubles to honor. It was a world of cloth and customers and credit, of bolts of muslin and accounts to be kept, and at the heart of it, in a little back office that smelled of ink and tallow and new fabric, were the books, the ledgers. For a shop lives or dies by its books, and old Mr. Mercer, Hannah's father, kept his beautifully and discovered, when his daughter was scarcely 8 years old, that she had a gift for figures, the like of which he had never seen. It is a real thing, that gift, though the world is forever surprised to find it in a woman, and forever ungracious about admitting it once found. Some minds simply see numbers, see the shape of them, the way they ought to fall, the place where they have gone wrong, the way a musician's ear hears a false note in a room full of sound. Hannah Mercer had that mind. By 10 she was keeping her father's daybook. By 12 she ran the whole accounts of the shop, the credit and the stock and the reckoning, better than her father ever had. By 15 she could glance down a page of figures and tell you, almost before she had read them, that they did not add up, and very nearly where the error lay. Her father, who was a good man and not a proud fool, did not hide her gift or marry it off. He used it, and was glad of it, and told her often that she had the best head for accounts in the whole county, and it was a great pity she'd been born a girl, for she'd have made a banker to rival the Bank of England. And then, for this is how these stories always begin, with a loss, her father died. A fever, swift and stupid, the year Hannah was 19. And it emerged in the cold aftermath that the good shop had been carrying more debt than even Hannah's careful books had been allowed to show. For her father, in his last failing year, had borrowed against the future to keep the family afloat, and had not told his daughter to spare her, and so the one thing her gift could not save was the one thing he had hidden from her. The shop went to the creditors. The warm, busy world above it closed like a door, and Hannah Mercer, at 19, found herself exactly what a great many gently raised tradesmen's daughters find themselves when the trade fails: alone, respectable, penniless, and qualified for nothing in the eyes of the world. Except one thing, for Hannah had grown up among cloth, and could sew as well as she could cipher. A mercer's daughter learns the needle alongside the ledger, and the needle, unlike the ledger, was a thing the world would pay a poor woman to ply. A seamstress was a respectable thing for a fallen genteel girl to become. A woman bookkeeper was a thing the world did not believe in and would not employ. And so Hannah Mercer put away the gift that was the truest thing about her, and took up the needle that was merely the safest, and became what the world was prepared to let her be: a quiet seamstress, going from house to house with her workbox, mending and making and altering, sitting silent in other people's sewing rooms, keeping her clever eyes down and her clever mind to herself, because she had learned, oh, she had learned it thoroughly by the age of 21, that the world did not want to know what was behind a seamstress's eyes, and punished her if she showed it. She was 23 when she came to Cromarsh Court in the autumn of 1819 to do the great house's mending for a season, and she came, as she went everywhere, quiet and plain and watchful, with her gift folded away small inside her where no one could see it, and walked, without the least idea of it, straight into the one house in England that most desperately needed exactly the thing she had spent 4 years hiding. For Cromarsh Court was dying, and its master could not understand why. Miles Aldous had been Earl of Cromarsh for 3 years, since the death of his father, who had been a careless, charming, open-handed man, much loved and not much use, the kind of nobleman who leaves an estate poorer than he found it, and a son better than he deserved. Miles was a different sort, serious where his father had been gay, anxious where his father had been blithe, painfully conscious of the weight of a great name, and a great house, and 400 years of Crowmarshes, looking down from the walls, expecting him not to be the one who lost it all. He had come to the title determined to be a good steward of it. He had worked, in his serious way, harder than his father ever had, and the estate was failing anyway, and he could not, for the life of him, see why. It made no sense. That was the thing that was slowly driving him to those midnight wanderings. The land was good, the best in the county, the harvests were sound, the tenants were diligent, the timber was fine. By every measure he could see, Crowmarsh ought to have been prospering. And instead, year on year, the money simply was not there. The accounts, when his steward laid them before him, told a dismal story of high costs and low returns, of repairs that swallowed fortunes and yields that disappointed, and 100 small expenses that mounted and mounted, and the bottom line, every quarter, was a little worse than the last. And Miles Aldous stared at it and could make no sense of it at all, because he was not a man with a head for figures, and he knew it, and the not knowing shamed him. For here is the truth at the heart of the Earl of Crowmarsh, and you must have it to understand both his trouble and his blindness. He was an intelligent man, a thoughtful and a decent one, but numbers were a fog to him. They always had been. He could read a book of philosophy and follow every turn of it. He could not read a page of accounts and tell you whether it was sound or rotten. And like a great many such men, proud men, who cannot bear to be seen not to understand a thing they feel they ought to understand, he had covered the weakness by trusting the man whose business it was to understand it for him. That man was his steward, Mr. Sutcliffe. And here we must look hard at Mr. Sutcliffe, because he is the rot in the floor, and he was very, very good at being invisible. He had been steward at Crowmarsh for 20 years, had served the old Earl, the careless, charming father, and served him so smoothly and so long that he had become a fixture, a piece of the house itself, beyond question, beyond suspicion. He was grave and respectful and tireless. He knew the estate better than anyone living. He was, by universal agreement, the soul of trusty competence. And he had been robbing Crowmarsh, patiently and systematically and brilliantly, for the better part of 15 years. I will tell you exactly how, because it is a thing worth understanding. How an honest-seeming man bleeds a great house white and makes it look like mere bad luck. He did it in the two places a dishonest steward always does it. He made the costs too high and the income too low, and he kept the difference. When a roof was mended for £40, he entered it at 60 and pocketed 20. When the estate's timber sold for 1,000, he recorded 800 and kept 2. He inflated the price of every nail and every bushel of feed and every laborer's wage. He understated every rent and every harvest and every sale. And across 15 years, in figures too many and too dull for any gentleman to check, he had funneled thousands upon thousands of pounds out of Crowmarsh and into his own quiet pockets, and had made the whole long theft look exactly like what the Earl believed it to be, an estate that simply, mysteriously, would not prosper. He had even, the clever devil, arranged the books so that they balanced, for a set of accounts that balances is a set of accounts no one questions, and Sutcliffe's always balanced, because he was an artist, and he made his lies add up. Old Mr. Mercer, Hannah's father, used to say that a clever thief keeps clever books, and the only thing that catches him is a cleverer pair of eyes. For 15 years, no such eyes had come to Crowmarsh. The old Earl had not had them, the young Earl did not have them. No one in the great house had the smallest reason or ability to look behind Mr. Sutcliffe's beautiful balancing figures and see the theft they were built to hide. And then, in the autumn of 1819, a quiet seamstress came to do the mending, and she had the cleverest pair of eyes in the county, folded away small inside her where no one ever looked. She found it by accident, which is how the best things are found. The Earl had given orders, or rather, his housekeeper had, on his behalf, that among the autumn mending, the household's worn bindings were to be seen to, and Hannah, being handy and trusted with such delicate work, was set to repairing the covers of the estate ledgers, whose leather backs had cracked and split with 20 years of daily handling. It was ordinary work. The books themselves were nothing to do with her. She was to mend the bindings and ask no questions about what was inside. And had Hannah Mercer been any other seamstress in England, that is exactly what she would have done. But Hannah Mercer could no more look at a page of figures without reading it than you or I could look at a page of words. It was not curiosity. It was deeper than curiosity. It was simply the way her mind was made. She sat in the little sewing room with the cracked ledger open across her knee, stitching its broken spine, and her eye fell, idly, the way your eye falls on a printed page, on the column of figures before her. And her mind, 4 years out of practice, and sharp as ever, did the thing it had always done, all on its own, without being asked. It saw a false note. It was a small thing, an entry for the cost of re-thatching a row of cottages, set down at a sum that Hannah, who had bought and sold and reckoned the price of every kind of work in her father's trade, knew at a glance was half again too high. Just that. A figure that did not feel right, and had she been an ordinary woman, she would have shrugged and thought, "What do I know of thatch?" and gone on with her stitching. But Hannah was not ordinary, and the wrong figure sat in her mind like a stone in a shoe, and that night, by her own candle in her own small room, she could not let it alone, and she did the thing that was going to upend both their lives. She got out a scrap of paper, and she began, quietly, to check. And once she began to check, she could not stop. For one wrong figure, to a mind like Hannah's, is a loose thread, and when she pulled it, the whole garment began to come apart in her hands. The thatch was too dear, and so was the timber felling, and so was the feed, and the wages, and the lime, and the carting. And the rents were too low, and the harvests too poor, and the sales of wool and wood and grain all came in, year on year, a little under what such good land and good husbandry must surely have fetched. One by one, night by night, Hannah Mercer worked through the estate ledgers of Cromarsh by the light of her own candle, after her day's sewing was done, reconstructing, on her own scraps of paper, what the true accounts of the estate must have been. And one by one, the false notes mounted, and the gap between what the books said and what the truth must be grew wider and wider, until it stood before her in a single staggering sum that took her breath away. Thousands of pounds, year upon year. A great house bled slowly white, while its books were made to balance, and its master tore his hair and could not see. And Hannah Mercer sat in her little room, at midnight, with 4 years of folded-away gift, suddenly vividly unfolded, and understood 3 things all at once. The first was that the Earl of Cromarsh was being robbed, methodically and massively, and had no idea. The second was that she, a seamstress, a nobody, a woman the world did not believe could even keep a sum, was the only person at Cromarsh, very possibly the only person for 50 miles, who had the eyes to see it. And the third thing, the thing that decided her, was simpler and fiercer than the other 2, and it is the thing I love her for. Hannah Mercer looked at that beautiful, lying, balancing set of books, at the artistry of the theft, the patient, brilliant cruelty of a trusted man bleeding a decent one for 15 years, and she was offended, to the very root of her, for numbers, to Hannah, were the one honest thing in a dishonest world. Figures could not lie, her father had taught her, only liars could make them, and the sight of a man bending the pure, honest truth of arithmetic to the service of a long, quiet theft filled her with a cold, clean anger, unlike anything she had felt in years. She did not yet know the Earl. She did not do it for him, not at the start. She did it because a thief was making the numbers lie, and Hannah Mercer could not, would not, leave it be. So she began to correct them. She told no one. Who would have believed a seamstress? She simply began, in the quiet of the nights, when the household slept and she had the run of the office where the ledgers lived, to mend the books the way she had been hired to mend their bindings, to strike through the false figures and pencil in the true ones, in her small exact hand, with her tiny notes in the margins. This does not reconcile, building, page by patient page, a record of the truth that any honest man could follow if only he troubled to look. She did not know, quite, what she meant to do with it. She knew only that the truth ought to exist somewhere, written down, in case anyone ever came who could read it. And the Earl of Cromarsh, finding those corrections appearing in his books like the work of a ghost, began, without the smallest idea who his ghost might be, to look. So now you understand the whole of what stood frozen in that doorway at midnight, a man who had been haunted for 7 weeks by a conscience that could count, and the woman, who was the conscience, caught at last in the candlelight, with the theft circled on the page before her. She lifted her head. Their eyes met across the little gold pool of the candle. And I will tell you, the Earl of Cromarsh's first feeling, in that moment, was not anger, and it was not even surprise, quite. It was a kind of vertigo, the sensation of the whole world quietly turning over. For he had built an entire small mythology around his midnight ghost. He had imagined, he scarcely knew what, some clerk, some agent, some clever, invisible man. And the ghost was the seamstress, the quiet, plain seamstress he had passed 100 times and never seen, the woman he had assumed, God forgive him, and he knew in that instant exactly what he had assumed, could very likely not read. And she was sitting in the middle of his accounts at midnight, with 3 years of ledgers open around her, and a pencil in her hand, and plainly, no fear whatsoever in her steady eyes, only a kind of weary readiness, as of a woman who has long expected to be caught at the one thing that matters, and has decided to meet it standing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You are the seamstress," he said at last. It was not what he meant to say. It was simply the most astonished fact in his head. "I am, my lord," said Hannah Mercer. "You have been correcting my ledgers." "I have." He came into the room then, slowly, like a man walking on ice, and he looked down at the table, at the open books, the ranked sheets of close calculation, the years of accounts laid bare and reckoned through in that small exact hand, and at the single figure she had circled twice in pencil, with its 4 words beside it. Here, this is the theft, and the Earl of Cromarsh, who had no head for figures, who had stared at these books for 3 baffled years and seen only fog, looked at what the seamstress had made of them, and felt the fog begin, for the first time, to clear. "Explain it to me," he said, and this is the first thing he did right, and I give it to him gladly. He pulled out the chair across the table from her, and he sat down, and he said, more quietly, "Please. I have been 3 years trying to understand why my house is dying, and I begin to think you are the first person who can tell me. Explain it to me, miss." He stopped, ashamed. "I do not even know your name. You have been under my roof 2 months, and saving my estate by candlelight, and I do not know your name." "Mercer," said Hannah. "Hannah Mercer." And something in the plain steadiness of her, in the way she did not flinch from him, and did not flatter him, and did not pretend to be less than she was, made him sit up straighter in his chair. "And I will explain it to you, my lord. But you had better brace yourself, for it is worse than you think, and it has been going on a great deal longer." And then Hannah Mercer, seamstress, Mercer's daughter, the best head for accounts in 2 counties, explained to the Earl of Cromarsh exactly how he had been robbed. She did it beautifully. I have it on the best authority, clearly and patiently, and without a wasted word, leading him through it the way her father had once led customers through a reckoning, so that even a man with no head for figures could follow every step. She showed him the inflated costs and the suppressed incomes. She showed him the pattern of it, year upon year. She showed him, with her own reconstructed true accounts laid beside the false ones, exactly how much had been taken, and roughly when, and she let him reach the only possible conclusion himself, rather than forcing it on him, that the books had been cooked, deliberately and expertly, by someone with intimate daily control of them over a great many years. that this was not bad luck or bad management, but patient, deliberate theft, and that there was only one man at Cromarsh who had held that control for the whole of that time. "Sutcliffe," said the Earl. The word came out of him like the breath knocked from a man's chest. "It cannot be Sutcliffe. He served my father. He has been here 20 years. There is no more trusted man at Cromarsh than Sutcliffe." "Yes," said Hannah gently. "That is rather how it is done, my lord. The most trusted man is the only one who can. A thief who is suspected steals nothing. Only a trusted one can rob you for 15 years. The trust is not the reason it cannot be him. The trust is the reason it is." And the Earl of Cromarsh sat in the candlelight and looked at this quiet woman who had just, in the space of an hour, explained the ruin of his house more clearly than 3 years of his own anguished effort had managed. And he was visited, all at once, by a great wave of shame that I think was the beginning of the making of him. "I assumed you could not read," he said. He said it boldly, because he was an honest man underneath his pride, and because it needed saying. "When you came, the housekeeper mentioned the new seamstress, and I did not even think it. I assumed there was nothing behind your eyes worth the trouble of knowing. I have walked past you in my own corridors for 2 months as though you were a piece of the furniture, and you have spent those 2 months, by candlelight, after your day's labor, quietly saving my entire family from ruin, asking nothing, for a man who never once did you the courtesy of learning your name." He shook his head slowly. "I do not think I have ever been so ashamed of anything in my life. I have been a fool, Miss Mercer, in the most expensive way a man can be. I have looked at the one person who could save me, and seen no one at all." And Hannah Mercer looked at him across the candle, at his honest shame, which was a thing she had not expected and did not quite know what to do with. For the gentry did not, in her experience, apologize to seamstresses, and felt something shift, very slightly, in the careful folded-away place where she had kept herself safe for 4 years. "You are not the first to assume it, my lord," she said. "You will not be the last. The world has decided what a seamstress is, and what she is not, and it is not in the habit of checking its sums." A small dry pause, which is fortunate, as it happens. For if the world had ever once troubled to look behind my eyes, I should not have been sitting here tonight to look behind your stewards. And the Earl of Cromarsh laughed, a short, surprised, slightly broken laugh, the first real laugh to come out of him in a year, and Hannah Mercer permitted herself the very smallest of smiles, and across the table, in the candlelight, between the open ledgers and the circled theft, something began that neither of them yet had a name for. But you must not think it was easily done from there, for a cornered thief is a dangerous thing, and Mr. Sutcliffe had 15 years and several £1,000s to lose. They moved carefully, and here is the second thing the Earl did right, and it tells you how fast the man was growing. He did not go charging at Sutcliffe in a fury, nor did he hand the matter to some London lawyer and shoulder Hannah aside. He understood now that the only mind at Cromarsh equal to the steward's was the seamstress's, and he did the sensible and the radical thing both at once. He made her his partner in it. For a fortnight, by candlelight, the Earl of Cromarsh and Hannah Mercer worked side by side through the books, building the case, not the rough midnight reconstruction now, but a proper, complete, unanswerable proof. Every false entry matched against the true cost, every suppressed sale documented, the whole 15-year theft laid out in a fair, clear hand that no court in England could wave away. Hannah did the reckoning. The Earl gathered the outside proofs, the real receipts, the true prices, the testimony of the tradesmen and tenants who had been paid one sum and seen another entered. Together they made a thing of iron. And those were, I think, though neither of them would have said so at the time, the happiest fortnight of nights either of them had yet known. For there is a particular intimacy in working side by side at a hard task that matters, late by one candle, with the great house asleep around you, heads bent together over a page, the quiet murmur of figures, the small triumphs, as another piece of the truth fell into place. The Earl discovered, in those nights, that the quiet seamstress was not only the cleverest person he had ever met, but the best company, dry and sharp and unawed by him, quick to laugh once you earned it, possessed of a low, fierce honesty that made every other voice he knew sound like flattery. And Hannah discovered that the remote Grand Earl was, underneath the pride and the weight of his name, a lonely, decent, badly frightened man, working himself ragged to be worthy of a house that was crushing him, and that he had, once you got past the shame, a real and growing wonder at her, a way of looking at her clever hands moving down a column of figures as though she were performing a miracle that no one in 4 years had so much as approached. She fell in love with him over those ledgers. She knew it, and was frightened of it, for she was a seamstress, and he was an earl, and she knew exactly how that song ended. And he fell in love with her, though it took him a little longer to know it, men being slower at these things, over the same ledgers, watching her save his life, one honest figure at a time. But love would have to wait, for there was a thief to catch. It came to its head, as these things do, when Sutcliffe realized he was discovered. He realized it because he was clever, as clever, nearly, as Hannah, which is why he had got away with it so long. And a man who has spent 15 years watching his own books like a hawk notices when someone else begins watching them too. He noticed the corrections. He noticed the Earl's new and unwelcome interest in figures he had never troubled with before. He noticed, with a cold prickle of alarm, that the seamstress of all people, seemed lately to spend a great deal of time near the estate office. And being a clever and a ruthless man with everything to lose, Mr. Sutcliffe did not wait to be accused. He moved first. He went to the Earl, grave, respectful, the soul of trusty competence, exactly as he had been for 20 years, and he told him, with every appearance of pained reluctance, that he felt it his duty to raise a delicate matter. The new seamstress, Mercer, he had observed her, he was sorry to say, prowling about the estate office at night, meddling with the account books, even, he could scarcely credit it, defacing them, scribbling in the margins, altering the figures. He feared, he said, the gravest things, that the woman was not what she seemed, that she meant to cover some theft of her own, that a person of her station, found tampering with a nobleman's accounts in the dark, could mean nothing honest by it. He advised, most strongly for his lordship's own protection, that the woman be dismissed at once, turned out without a character, and the matter looked into before she could do further mischief. It was, you understand, a masterstroke, for it took the exact truth that someone had been altering the ledgers by candlelight, and turned it inside out, made Hannah the thief, and himself the loyal protector, and got rid of the one pair of eyes that could ruin him, all in a single grave and reasonable breath. 6 weeks earlier, it would have worked perfectly. The Earl of Cromarsh of 6 weeks earlier would have heard his trusted steward of 20 years accuse a nobody of a seamstress, and would have had her dismissed by nightfall and never given it another thought. But this was not the Earl of Cromarsh of 6 weeks earlier. This was a man who had sat across a candle from Hannah Mercer and watched her hand him back his own life, who knew to the penny what his steward had stolen, and exactly how, who had spent a fortnight of nights learning the difference between the woman the world saw and the woman who was there. And he looked at Mr. Sutcliffe, grave, reasonable, lying, and he understood that he was watching the whole 15-year fraud perform itself in miniature, one last time, right in front of him, the trusted man, smoothly turning the truth inside out to destroy the honest one. And something in the Earl of Cromarsh went very cold and very clear. "Thank you, Sutcliffe," he said mildly. "You are quite right that someone has been altering the ledgers by candlelight, and that it is a most serious matter, and that it must be looked into at once." He rose. "Indeed, I have looked into it rather thoroughly already. Will you come to the office? I find there are a number of figures I should like to go over with you. Miss Mercer will join us. She has, as it happens, a remarkable head for accounts, quite the most remarkable I have ever encountered. I think you will find her corrections most instructive." And I am told the look that crossed Mr. Sutcliffe's face, in that moment, was a thing to behold. What happened in the estate office that morning, I can give you quickly, for it was, in the end, no contest at all, which is the way of it, when the truth has been written down by someone who cannot be argued out of arithmetic. The Earl laid the proof before his steward. Hannah laid it out, rather, for the Earl had the sense to let her, and Sutcliffe had the singular experience, in the last hour of his long career of theft, of being taken apart, figure by figure, by a seamstress. She walked him through it, as she had walked the Earl through it, the inflated costs, the suppressed incomes, the 15 years of beautiful balancing lies, each one matched now against the true sum she had reconstructed, and the Earl had proved. Sutcliffe blustered, at first, then he threatened, then he attempted, grey-faced, to bargain. But there is no bargaining with a clear set of true accounts, and Mr. Sutcliffe had spent his life relying on the fact that no one would ever produce one, and now someone had, and it was over. The Earl did not have him hanged, though embezzlement on that scale could have stretched his neck. He did a colder and, I think, a wiser thing. He laid the whole proof before the magistrates, recovered what could be recovered of the stolen thousands, for Sutcliffe, like most such men, had not had the wit to spend it all, and a good part was got back, and saw the steward stripped of everything and transported, sent off to the far side of the world, to begin again at the bottom of it with nothing, which for a man of Sutcliffe's vanity and cleverness was very likely a sharper punishment than any rope. He troubled Cromarsh no more, and the estate, the dying house, the failing acres that had baffled their master for 3 years, the estate, once the leak in its hull was stopped, righted itself almost at once, for there had never been anything wrong with it but the thief. The good land was still good, the harvests still sound, and now the money they made stayed where it belonged. Within a year, Cromarsh was prospering as it had not prospered in 2 decades, and Miles Aldous, Earl of Cromarsh, stood at last where he had so longed and failed to stand, a good steward of his great inheritance, the Cromarshes on the walls no longer looking down on the one who lost it, but on the one who saved it. Except, of course, that he had not saved it, and he knew it. And this brings us, at last, to the part of the story I have been keeping for you, which is the best part, as it always is. He went to her on a winter evening, when the worst was over, and the books were clean, and the house was beginning, quietly, to live again. And he found her, where he had taken to finding her, in the estate office by candlelight, for she had gone on keeping his accounts, the two of them having simply never discussed her returning to the mending, and both of them having silently preferred it that way. "Miss Mercer," he said, "I have come to settle a debt." She looked up, and something in her went still and careful, for she had been dreading this, the moment of reward, the moment he would press money into her hand for services rendered, and turn her, with his gratitude, back into a seamstress who had done a clever thing once. She had braced for it for weeks. "There is no debt, my lord," she said, a little stiffly. "I did what any honest person would do, finding a theft. You owe me nothing." "I owe you everything," said the Earl, "and I am not such a fool as to insult you by trying to pay it in money, which I think is what you are bracing yourself for, and I can see that you are." He came and sat across the table from her, in the chair that had become his, across the candle that had become theirs. "No, I have a different sort of reckoning in mind, and you, of all people, will appreciate that I have done the sums carefully before bringing them to you." He laid it out then, and he did it, bless him, in her own language, the language of accounts, because he had learned by now that it was the surest way to her. "On the one side of the ledger," he said, "is everything the world will tell us is wrong with what I am about to propose. You are a seamstress and a tradesman's daughter, and I am an earl, and the whole of society will say that the gap between us cannot be crossed, and that a man in my position, who marries a woman in yours, is a fool throwing away his name. That is the debit side. I have entered it honestly. I will not pretend it is not there." He paused. "And on the other side, on the credit side, Hannah, is every night of this autumn, is the fact that you are the cleverest person I have ever known, and the most honest, and that you saved my house, and my name, and very likely my reason, by candlelight, asking nothing, is the fact that I have not, in 3 years of crushing loneliness in this great cold house, been truly company to a single living soul, until you sat down across this table from me, and told me to brace myself, because it was worse than I thought, is the fact that I have come to find I cannot read a column of figures, or face a difficult day, or sit by a fire of an evening, without wishing you across the table from me. Not as my bookkeeper, though God knows you are the best in England, but as the one person in the world in whose company I am entirely myself. He held her eyes. I have done the sum, Hannah. I have done it 100 times this fortnight, every way I know how. And the credit side outweighs the debit so far that the thing does not even reconcile. There is no contest in it at all. The only honest entry left to make is the last one. Marry me. And Hannah Mercer sat in the candlelight, with her clever heart pounding, and did what she always did with a sum she could not quite believe. She checked it. You are an earl, she said, low. I am a seamstress. You would be giving up. I would be giving up the good opinion of a great many people, whose good opinion I have never valued, he said, in exchange for the woman I cannot do without. I have told you, I have done the sum. It is not close. A pause, and then, more gently, the pride all gone from him. But I think, Hannah, that you are not really checking my arithmetic. I think you are checking whether you dare. You have spent 4 years folding yourself away small, because the world punished you every time you showed what you were. And I am asking you to unfold, all the way, in the open, as my wife and my equal and the keeper of my house and my books and my heart. And I think the thing that frightens you is not the gap between us at all. It is the hope. And I know something of how it is to be frightened of hope. But I am asking you to risk it, because I have been 3 years drowning in a thing I could not understand, and you walked into my house and read it clear, and I do not intend to spend the rest of my life without the one pair of eyes that ever saw me true. And Hannah Mercer, Mercer's daughter, seamstress, the best head for accounts in 2 counties, who had folded herself away small for 4 long years because the world had no place for what she was, looked at the man across the candle who had assumed she could not read and had learned, to his everlasting credit, exactly how wrong a clever man can be, and who was now asking her, in her own honest language, to unfold. She let herself check the sum one last time, and it came out, every way she reckoned it, the same. It does not reconcile, my lord, she said at last, and her voice was not quite steady, and there was the smallest smile starting at the corner of her mouth. By my reckoning, the credit side runs so far over that the books will not balance at all. She set down her pencil. There is only one entry I can think of that will close them. Make it then, said the Earl of Cromarsh. Yes, said Hannah Mercer. The answer is yes. And he came round the table and took her ink-stained, clever hands in his, there in the candlelight among the honest books, and the accounts of Cromarsh balanced at last, in every sense there is. And that, my dear listeners, is where I leave them, in a small, warm office, at the heart of a house that was dying and is now alive again, an earl and a seamstress, with the candle burning low between them and the books, for the first time in 20 years, telling nothing but the truth. They were married in the spring, and it scandalized precisely the people you would expect, and delighted everyone with any sense, and the new Countess of Cromarsh never once pretended to be other than what she was, a tradesman's daughter who could outreckon any banker in England, and the county learned, soon enough, not to underestimate the quiet woman with the clever eyes, for she ran the great estate's affairs with a brilliance that made it the best-managed land in 3 counties, and no steward ever robbed Cromarsh again, for there was no longer any robbing a house whose mistress could read a false figure across a darkened room. She taught her husband his figures in the end, slowly, patiently, the way her father had taught her, and the Earl of Cromarsh, who had once assumed his seamstress could not read, grew at last into a man who could keep his own books. though he always said, and meant it, that he kept them only for the pleasure of being corrected, and that the finest sound in the world was his wife's pencil pausing over his arithmetic, and her dry voice saying, "This does not reconcile, my love." If you ask me what this story is truly about, I will tell you it is about the most expensive assumption a person can make, which is to decide, at a glance, that there is nothing behind another soul's eyes worth knowing. The Earl of Cromarsh made that assumption, and it nearly cost him everything. His house, his name, his whole inheritance. For the one mind that could save him was sitting silent in his sewing room the entire time, folded away small, because the world had taught her to hide the very thing the world most needed from her. And he was saved in the end only when he stopped assuming and started looking, when he opened a door at midnight and troubled, at last, to see who was actually there. So look twice, my dears, at the quiet ones, at the plain ones, the silent ones, the ones the world has folded away small and decided are nobody. You have no idea what gift is hidden behind those downcast eyes, waiting for one person to trouble to look, nor what it might be worth, to you, on some dark night, when your own books will not reconcile, and you cannot for the life of you see why. You have sat by my fire through a long autumn of candlelight and clever figures, and a theft 15 years in the making, and I will not pretend I could have told it without you at the other end of the line. If it has given you something tonight, a warmth, a smile, a small fierce certainty that you are more than the world has decided you are, then I would ask you, before you go, to subscribe to Moonlight at Mayfair, for there are a great many more of these, and every one has a heart, and I should hate for you to miss a single one. It costs you nothing, and it means more to me than I can say from this side of the fire. And if you still will not, well, you know what I am going to say. You owe me one. You have owed me, since a candle burned under an office door. I am patient, and, say it with me now, I never forget a debt. I always know exactly what I am owed, and by whom, and to the penny. It is rather a gift of mine. Subscribe to Moonlight at Mayfair, and come